Dear mother, can you hear me whining? It's been 3 whole months since that I have left your home. Pay attention to the cracked streets and the broken homes. Some call it slum, some call it nice. I wanna take you through a wasteland I like to call my home. Welcome to paradise. The gunshot rings out at the station. All right. Oh, you guys, I'm just being silly at this point. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Back for another one. Today, we are going to talk about Green Day's first 3 albums. I am wearing, getting into the spirit of Green Day, my Billy Joe inspired collared shirt, black button up. I didn't have a bright red skinny tie, so instead I am wearing a dark red sparkly scarf. My eyeshadow is full on green with green glitter. I've got Billy Joe black eyeliner going on. I've got some wrist cuffs, and I put my hair into the faux hawk configuration that I could get it into. So, here we go. All right, so Green Day. Who is Green Day? Green Day is Billy Joe Armstrong on vocals and guitar, Mike Dirt, harmonies and bass guitar, and Trey Cool on drums. For the first album, 1039 Smoothed Out Slappy Hours, the drummer was John Kiffmeyer. And when I looked up the information about them, yes, it does look like they are still together from 1987 to the present, which by my calculations is almost 40 years. And I just want to first off say kudos to that for being able to put up with somebody for almost 40 years. I can't even imagine that. Oh, you know, and that just goes to show you really have to have a great friendship and actually like those people, or at least have like a really good working relationship, because otherwise, I mean, forget about it. You're not going to last. So good on you. The albums that we're going to talk about, number 1, 1039 / Smoothed Out Slappy Hours, was released on October 1st, 1991 on Lookout Records, and was a compilation of their first full-length album called 39 / Smooth, and of 2 EPs, 1000 Hours and Slappy. So basically it was a release of their first groups of songs. Some of the release dates in 91 different online is listed, but there's like another EP that I saw there. But for all intents and purposes, this was their first stuff. Secondly, we've got Kerplunk, which was released on December 17th, 1991 on Lookout Records, and this is their second studio album. And then we have Dookie, which was released on February 1st, 1994 on Reprise Records. This is their major label debut, and it was recorded at Fantasy Records, which was actually kind of brought a little flutter to my heart because I used to walk back and forth right in front of there every day. So that was exciting. I just know exactly where it is. And that's their third studio album. And if I do future albums of theirs, I can look into their change from indie label to big time. But for now, I'm leaving the research at that, just because this video is going to be really memory heavy. I have a lot of really great memories of Green Day. As a genre, I would call this genre like pop punk light. Pop punk to me is less punk and more pop. And Green Day is really characterized by its simplicity. Not that that is a bad thing. I feel like the punk part is more of a flavor, a slight tinge or tone over what are some really, at the core, really well-constructed pop songs. Green Day, at least in this early era, was punk in terms of subject matter in a way that's not too extreme and was acceptable for a mass audience. So themes of being right there at that age before you leave your parents' house. Your teenage girlfriend and crushes, the boredom, not knowing where your life is going, disliking your surroundings, and generally just not having enough experience of the rest of the world yet or any sort of life experience to have enough comparison, honestly. But knowing you're ready, like, how are you even going to be able to do that if your family hasn't set you up properly to? And like, are they even an example themselves? Because you look at them and you're like, well, they're already tired old adults who, from your point of view, are just boring sellouts who have no energy and they gave up and don't really understand anything about life anymore and don't care either. So, it's a frustrating time. So really for these albums, it was rebellion in a sense, but not too controversial. Teenagers go through this time looking at life and questioning the way we've structured things and what your place is in it. What I mean is, for this era, it's not punk in terms of subject matter in a way that it's like overly political or like advocating for anarchy and violence and hating the system and stuff like that. In a good way, I was thinking it's almost the most self-aware and therapeutic punk subject matter because it's so right on the nose of someone that age is going through. Meaning, like, it's not a misdirected anger. It's not borderline scary self-hate or depression. It's literally singing directly all about the things that were plaguing them as kids in a more direct environment kind of way, rather than being angry about like some huge bigger picture. So very savvy and very marketable. And so they were. One thing I really loved about these first 3 albums too, in terms of the sound of them, is that there are a lot of like major chords. There's major chords, there's power chords, and the subject matter isn't too distressing. And for me, like, it was the perfect combination of having that punk rock sarcasm, but then you could also put on something that at the same time would make you feel really good. So you really didn't have to, at least audio or sound-wise, be taken to a darker place or something that felt more uncomfortable or sad, but you still like had that edge to the music if you wanted to listen to it. Just a little bit of feeling like somebody understood you or that you were slightly rebelling against something. So in a lot of ways, it's a lighter sort of angst. In terms of construction of the band in instrumentation, I will say I really appreciate a band that's constructed with different instruments rather than the standard drums, guitar, bass, vocal. It's just nice to have, in this case, a good 3-piece band, just because it's something that's a little different. Like Green Day, Concrete Blonde, Morphine, Violent Femmes, Nirvana, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and on and on and on. You've either got something you're adding to the equation or like something that you're missing. White Stripes with the 2 of them. Or then you have bands like The Doors where the bass line is played by the keyboards, or just adding something a little different, a different sound and a different feel. So I have a really good appreciation for committing to a different setup in that sense. And then I got to thinking about the being purposefully simple. Like, as far as choosing simplicity and where to stop, another thing I was thinking about is, like, sometimes in terms of what other musicians are able to bring to the table, sometimes less is more and sometimes more is more. But so, as an example, like when I write songs, I sit there with my acoustic guitar, I write the rhythm parts, I write the melodies as I'm singing along to it, and the lyrics, and then that's how it generally starts out, right? I'm sitting there, I'm coming up with this stuff. Now, after that, you can really flesh it out and add whatever you want to it. You've got that foundation, and then it could just go from there. Like sometimes I hear all the parts and I hear the bass line in my head, or I hear different solos that could be on top of it. And maybe like I'm not the one who has the talent to play all those crazy solos, but I can hear them, you know. And whenever you bring other people into the mix to write with you, like if you go in to record something or you go in to practice something, you get these different flavors of then what they bring to the table. In addition to like I'll never forget the moment because I can also, hear the drum beats and imagine in my mind too, and I assume that other people who write can do this. Before you get there, you kind of have like an idea of where it's going. And then you get into the studio, and I have brought a drummer in to play one of my songs, studio musician. And then all of a sudden, it's like he's adding a disco beat to the things that I wrote. And it was just sort of surprising because I didn't expect for things to turn out like that. And so this is all a long tangent for me to say about Green Day. These simple song constructions of just like very basic major chord pop song, like you could add a lot of things to that than they did to make it either like more overdone in that sense or, whatever. And somebody had the foresight maybe at some point or maybe didn't have the resources, like who knows what the motivation was, to be like, no, the way we have it is good. It's 3. It's 3 people. Drums, bass, vocal. You don't have to add like a horn section or like other crazy solos and stuff. Like we want it pop punk and we're just keeping it like this. And so I have respect for that because whatever the motivation was, at some point, that's a decision. I mean, certainly at this point, that's a decision. So that's how they kept it for these first 3 albums. Which, another thing that I respect them for, is that it makes it more accessible to people. Because for songs like these, there's something that, like if somebody else is on the same wavelength with you, you could just show up at their house and like instantly have a camaraderie if you're trying to play stuff together, because this music is not going to be that difficult. So you have a lot more opportunities to step up and sort of connect with people through this music in that type of way. Like, for example, my own personal example. The other night, I was down at a guitar store and I was like messing around with acoustic guitars, and I came across these 2 high school boys who were sitting there with acoustic guitars, and they were playing What's Up by 4 Non-Blondes. Like one of them told the other one the chord progression and then, okay, play this. And then the other kid started like soloing over it and they were singing at the same time. And then like, I don't, know these guys, but I just do what I do. And then I stepped up and I was like, hey, do you guys want me to sing this? and then we're all like singing the song together. And it was just a great moment because that's only something that you can do if songs, are generally simple enough for a more common denominator to be able to get it, and like down to earth enough to where you can step up and do something like that with people, at the drop of a dime. And Green Day is like that too. So I know that, there are incredibly talented musicians out there who could cover just about anything. I mean, certainly there are. But there's really something to be said about songs like Green Day's that the average person could like step up and figure it out with just whoever the hell comes along. And so you have to question things at some point in that respect. Like, I was thinking, why are we making things more complicated than they need to be? Like, why? Like all those old 60s sort of pop songs that were on the radio, like very, very simple pop songs, or like the Beatles. We know the Beatles are crazy talented. They started out playing their circuit with these very, very simple pop songs, love songs. And sometimes Green Day makes you take a step back and question, like, why are we making things more than they have to be? Is it to show something or is it to prove something? Because and I'm just playing devil's advocate on the other side here. On the other side of the coin, when you're writing songs, and this happened to me, you kind of at some point just get bored with like the same four chord things. Eventually you get bored, at least I did. And I started trying to make up like different chordings, different voicings, different finger picking patterns and stuff, because I just felt like, you know what? I have used all of the D minors that I can possibly use everywhere that I could think of to use them. And so, I mean, I guess, I got to that point, but for Green Day, it's kind of surprising and also really inspiring that, like, for a 30-year career, and I probably missed, more of their later albums and stuff, but 30 years of writing simple, well-constructed songs with great harmonies, a good bass line, a good drum fill with three people, and you just like never run out of material to be able to do this. So that's really cool of them to continue to have a lot of creativity in that way. And what's great about Green Day also, in terms of the simplicity, because I wanted to hammer this home, I guess, is since it's mostly power chords for the rhythm guitar, it really allows somebody, when they're just starting out, to be able to play pretty much an entire album. Like if you sit down and try to play it, for example, one after a certain level of experience could probably just play the entire thing just by listening to the song for a couple of minutes and, jotting it down. And that's not a bad thing. Like, I remember over the years, the band being praised for having great bass lines and great drum parts. And while, yes, that does happen to be true, I think a lot of that can be chalked up to the fact that because it is such simple song construction and the guitar parts are so simple, it really allows you to focus on other things that are in the song. Like it gives you space to be able to listen to the bass guitar and the drums, because there are a lot of great bass players and great drummers that just may not get enough attention if they're overshadowed by other things. So the sparsity in them being, a three-piece band allows these other instruments to shine through. And so I think it is a good idea for somebody just starting out playing to go through some of these simple punk albums like this and just be able to play them. Like, I think that, that may be missing a lot in more current music, or maybe just more complicated music. Like, good song that's really catchy, that's simple to play, and that everyone can sing along with. A great thing about Green Day, too, another developed skill they had, is that there are a lot of really, really great harmonies going on in the vocals. And that's a skill that I feel like people may not work on as much anymore. Just like singing along with two people, being able to harmonize with each other throughout the songs. Like, for some reason, I feel like that could be sort of a lost art. I mean, I'm not sure. But you can listen to like a whole Green Day album and there's not one guitar solo. But in return, what you get is rhythm guitar strumming, which is also an incredible skill for somebody to have. I mean, it can be like more of a basic skill if you're just starting out playing. But on the other hand, I think what's really important, person to person, is like, know your strengths, know what your strengths are. Like for me, at some point I had to accept, as much as I tried with my little hands, I was not going to be able to be Jimi Hendrix. or like soloing like Slash or something. That's just not my strength. Like my strength lies in being a singer-songwriter and playing rhythm guitar and writing songs and singing. And that's a skill in and of itself and a highly valued skill. And there are many crazy soloists who don't have that skill either. So I think that it's nice that, Billy Joe plays to his strengths and it's prized for what it is. Now, I know Green Day may not have used a lot of complex chords or different types of voicings or any sort of finger picking type stuff, but in a lot of ways, some things just are what they are, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, this is the one thing that I loved about punk at the time, whenever it came onto the scene, is that it had a way of bringing music down to the people who were listening to it, because there wasn't any internet at the time. So celebrities like in California or wherever, the entertainment industry were not as easily accessible at the time that these albums came out, certainly not. And nobody had any access to people's lives. Like social media didn't exist, internet didn't exist, and it was very much like all these people that got to do this for a living were on a pedestal far, far away. But what punk did when it became popular at the time was that it really showed people who were learning, or kids who were having like whatever feelings that they were having, that they could do this too. Like they could be involved in this too, this far off thing. And so it was very grassroots kind of thing. And Green Day really, helped us to see that. So I want to talk about punk a little bit. Yeah. In a way, a lot of us also had a lot of those angsty feelings, just like Green Day. And it gave us that freedom in that, like, when it's punk, you automatically assume that what you're singing about may not be as socially acceptable, just kind of like by default. So it gave you the freedom in the room to sing about and write about and feel whatever you wanted that was really meaningful to you, instead of trying to do something contrived, or maybe, it was more out of the box, not in a weird way, but like something that you wouldn't say in normal, polite conversation, just kind of more in your face. So it also, gave you the freedom to play a good freaking power chord. Like nobody was going to judge you for, not being technically able to play your instrument as much because you were doing what you were doing. And so then it brings on this feeling of camaraderie with younger people, or maybe this people that don't feel like they fit in or belong anywhere, because, now you're not dependent on somebody else dictating whatever you're going to say or however you're going to play it, or whatever you and your friends understand to be meaningful. Now you're creating it yourself. And that sort of self-reliance is really what it's all about. And it creates a bond between people whenever they're creating their own art, in the sense that nobody else has to approve. And the great thing about it, in terms of punk rock, is that, like a lot of other genres out there, like EDM, jazz, just whatever country, everybody can have that solid base of punk, but it can sound so vastly different from one band to the other, depending on the subgenre. And that's what really makes it unique, is that it's going to be whatever comes from you and your own experiences. Like it doesn't have to be a certain thing. And Green Day did their thing, and so can you. I think punk in general also allowed us to take ownership of something that we traditionally wouldn't have access to. And so it became uniquely ours in the way that your parents aren't going to like it, so now it's yours. And it can be as obnoxious as you want. That was a wonderful thing. There's like a really freeing feeling when you listen to it, to something that is so simple like Green Day. It's like, for once, you don't have to be something that you're not. And I'd say, this can be a larger conversation. But punk rock at its core is a lot about authenticity and things not being contrived. And in that way, it's something that you can take with you for your entire life, like these lessons, if you will, as well as the self-reliance that comes with it. Like, there are a lot of times when we have to go out into the world as adults and put on a lot of airs, but there's some of us out there that it's just like impossible to actually do that. I mean, myself included. Like, I can't even, no matter what. Still at the core, I am exactly whatever I am. And as for Green Day's version of punk, it's not always like about getting drunk and destroying everything. Although I guess it could partially be that if you are genuinely, authentically that angry. But there's a lot of lessons that we learn growing up punk rock that we can still take with us as grown-ups. And that is just being an open, down-to-earth, genuine, authentic person who can take care of themselves, being a genuinely good friend, being loyal, being okay with exactly who you are, and having an openness and self-awareness of yourself and others out in the world, and critically thinking about things constantly, questioning what you see, hear, what you read, instead of just blindly accepting things as they're told to you, keeping yourself as the final arbiter because you trust yourself, knowing that no matter what you're told, nobody is better than you. And you're not better than anybody else. Therefore, no ultimate authority can be bestowed upon you. So these are good lessons that you can take with you out into the world. And whoever this band's members are today as adults, I mean, I don't know, I don't know them as people. But I somehow hope and want to believe that they still have this foundation that we, in the punk rock community all have in whatever way that we choose to express it. I mean, it evolves, You evolve over the years. Okay, I want to talk about some memories. I want to talk about some memories that I have of these albums. Dookie, Kerplunk, and Smoothed Out Slappy Hours. So I was trying to go back and think about the first time that I ever actually heard Green Day or was like aware of them as a band. And I went way, way back. And the first thing that I remember was that I was ordering band t-shirts or something, or maybe like cassettes through the mail. And so at this time, this is like early 90s. So there was no internet. You didn't have ways to get information to each other than paper, if anybody can imagine that. Paper mail and paper. So, music from other states or from other parts of the world had to get to you somehow. And you had to rely on the people that to be able to find this stuff or get your information by other means. So we had this thing called a zine. And, if you know what a zine is, you know what a zine is. But if you don't know what a zine is, I think that it's pretty much short for magazine. But it was basically like this DIY booklet or little pamphlet that we, ourselves, the kids as the teenagers or like young adults or indie record labels or whatever, used to spread information that was solely for us, by us, about us, and we could put whatever we wanted into it. So it was really like, rumblings of DIY. Like, you can print your own stuff, self-published things. It could be like little different political things or things we needed to know about or were upset about. Or it could be people's art. like poetry or things that they drew. It could be information about different cool local bands or albums or just whatever else. And some of these zines, had reached through like the entire country somehow. I mean, they would print them in mass and be able to like mail them around the country. So for Green Day, I don't know, somehow I ordered something and I don't remember what it was, but eventually I got a zine/magazine catalog in the mail from the record label Lookout Records. And so I'd never heard of this before, but of course I read the entire paper pamphlet of everything, and it told me about all these bands that were on this record label. And one of them was Green Day, and there was Filth and Blatz, and I think Screeching Weasel was on this too. And then there were all these bands from the Bay Area that had like collectively, quote unquote, signed with this label, and they were pushing their albums. So I, in my small southern town, got to learn about this, and I thought that was super cool. And of course, I like wanted to have all the records on this label. So that's how I discovered Green Day had material before they really got big on MTV. But of course, my first earliest memories also include, most like everyone else my age, hearing songs from the album Dookie on MTV. Like, that bass line for Longview or whatever, when he's like on the couch and the video starts and he's just sitting on the couch being bored. Like, how can you forget it? It's just inescapably catchy, and it pulled you in. And then who can forget or escape the video for Basket Case, which literally played every 15 minutes for like 2 years. It just pummeled you. And so, after they had their first real hit, that was like an entry point for most people at that point. So at the time, I got that. I loved that. So I went searching out for their older material too. And that's how I discovered Kerplunk and 1,039 Slapped Out Hours or whatever. And then I started listening to those too. So I had a cassette tape, like not, that you would buy of the album in the store, but like a blank cassette tape that had Kerplunk on one side and Dookie on the other side. And I played that thing over and over and over again, back to back with those two albums. And I just love them. Another memory that I had that I wanted to note was the song Welcome to Paradise, which is on both the album Dookie and Kerplunk, two different versions of that, is whenever I was in high school, I was in the choir, and we had like a little rock band version of the choir, like School of Rock, where we would all practice separately from the actual choir. Like the choir itself would sing more like church type music, and this was a way for, kids to be able to play like rock instruments and do more covers and everything. And so there was a rock band put together, like it had a drummer and keyboards and guitar players and a bass player, and there were 6 of us who would sing vocals. And so, we got to have an opportunity to submit songs that we would want to cover for this little rock band. So, of course, me being into punk rock at the time, I suggested that we sing Welcome to Paradise because that made sense. So the reaction that I got out of like the other kids that were in the little band in high school they were super talented, just, great musicians already by then. And like the last thing I think as a guitar player, when you're trying to show off and play like, really technical guitar parts and complicated things, was to like go back to basics and play a bunch of power chords in front of everyone. So even the kids in high school were like, that's beneath us. But I was like, okay, but that's what I really want to sing. So, for whatever reason, the choir director agreed to this. So it was pretty like I don't even think anybody would step up and do the harmonies with me. It was just me singing it by myself. I don't know whose decision that was, but I learned all the lyrics to it, and it allowed me to be able to express my annoyance and disgust and angst about whatever my surroundings were. We practiced it and we learned it, and we went to play it at a show at the high school. And the show we had was some sort of break in the day where we were playing our songs in the gym, like the school gymnasium. The high school kids come out and they're all on the bleachers, and I started singing the song and we're playing, and then like they freaking got up like off the bleachers and started a mosh pit in front of me, like in the middle of the gym, which like nobody was happy about. And I didn't ask for, and I totally didn't plan for or expect. And so like nobody, said this to me directly, but I somehow felt that it was my fault for like subtly inciting a riot inside the school gym with my Green Day cover. But punk was popular at the time, and we had mosh pits and all that kind of stuff, so it was pretty normal. So it was pretty awesome. It was pretty epic. Another memory that I had about this is, I think too, what I didn't understand as a teenager, because like I said, you would have no way of knowing that a lot of these bands, these kids, are singing about their direct environment. But of course, it wouldn't have been like something me as a listener would have known about at the time. Like, what is in the Bay Area? I don't know. I grew up in Louisiana, right? And so Billy Joe was singing a lot about the stuff that was around him in the Bay because he grew up there. And one of the tracks on Kerplunk is called Christie Road. And like, I can't even tell you how many times I've listened to that song and sang it driving around along with like as a 15-year-old kid before I ever got out of my hometown and loving the harmonies and everything. And then finally, when as an adult, I lived in the Bay Area, that album had long been put aside because you just go on to different stuff. And like, I was nearing 30 at that point, and at some point out of nowhere, like a memory of it hit me, and I looked around and I was like, oh, the tracks at Christie Road. And I'm like, this right here, the tracks at Christie Road. Like I was literally standing there, and I was, because I went to school like right by the tracks, right in Emeryville, right there. And so just to imagine the difference in the progression of time when I was like young, kid from the swamp driving around with my crappy cassette tape, fast forward to like where I was at that moment. I've been listening to this stuff with no internet, not even existing yet, and not being able to touch these things that were so far out of reach for me, far away in the world, far from my experience as a teenager, and then to, sort of like leap into the future as an adult and literally be standing in the spot that somebody had been singing about. It's surreal and kind of mind-blowing because, I hadn't realized it, and I certainly didn't do it on purpose either. So that was a great moment. Another thing that happened from that zine that I got from Lookout Records, when I got to read about, was this cool, famous punk club called 924 Gilman. And I read about this club when I was that young and when I got the zine. So, like, I knew about it, And it had this kind of lore of being the punk club in California. And I thought that was super cool. And then later on, when I moved to the Bay, I wanted to look for 924 Gilman immediately because it had such that like widespread reputation. So I did, and I found it. And what's so funny is it ended up just being like the little punk club down the road in my mind, living there. It's just like nothing special about it. I mean, it's just a building that happens to be on Gilman. and that happens to be its address. It's like in the middle of the street, like any other businesses surrounding it. So I just thought it was funny, so far away, something that would look like the punk mecca that you would want to travel to. But when you're finally there, you're like, okay, it just showed me how something far away could seem really important, but it just happens to be the stuff that you're focused on in the moment. And so it taught me something about like entertainment and like public relations, because I would say the same thing about Hollywood. The only reason that Hollywood and celebrities are so loved and so important is because we, as a collective, have decided that that's what we're pointing our focus on. And there just happens to be a lot of cameras there. And this is just something that I learned in the process of, being an adult and growing up without internet and seeing how, a lot sort of my illusions shattered in that way. And so for Gilman, is a club with like a lot of history, and that makes it special in and of itself. But it was just funny to me that like whenever I was so young as a kid, I wanted to be part of it so much. And I went to school for audio, and like, man, I graduated and I was working, out doing sound out in the Bay Area. And a buddy of mine at one point offered for me to do sound at Gilman. And at the time, I was very much like on top of my game, really knowledgeable, like actively working. And I was like, well, what's it like? And he's like, oh, it's run by volunteers. It's a bunch of punk rock kids. The sound system sucks. There's always problems. We always have to fix everything. Nothing freaking works. It's broken. It's kind of like a rough gig. And I was like, that sounds shitty. And he was like, yeah, it's pretty shitty, but you're doing it for the kids to be there. And so, like, what I said? No. I said no. I don't know. I can't even believe it at this point looking back. It just goes to show the evolution of a person. I would have thought that that was like the coolest possible thing that I could do at that age when I was young. And then when I was actually like old enough to be there and be offered this wonderful, cool thing as a grown up, in my defense. It wasn't that I thought I was like too good for it or whatever. It's just that I imagined in physical, actual reality what my life and experience would have been the entire night, like with everybody blaming me for everything not working. But I do regret it now because it would have been like completing a journey full circle in that way. I mean, it probably would have been a rough time and a shitty night, but I at least would have wanted to have that memory of being able to complete that circle. And the fact that the person who offered me this gig, Robert, may he rest in peace, did offer it to me and then he passed away. It's like, don't regret the things you don't do. That's my advice. All right, about these albums. Yeah. Oh my God. So Dookie, Green Day's third studio album. Like when I went back and listened to that again, ever since I've listened to that again, it is stuck in my head. Like it's absolutely infectious. Every day I wake up and little snippets come out like I'm rocking through my day, and it's like, I declare I don't care no more. I'm going up and out and growing bored. And then I'm just like, I'm walking and something else will be like, and run out on confusion. I found what it says to be a man. I'm just like singing it, going through the house still. I haven't been able to get it out of my head. Like the whole album is just a total earworm, like tracks and tracks of earworms. In terms of Billy Joe's vocal too, I feel that some of the reason that the music has almost that punk rock sound is just because of the nasal quality of his California accent. Like it gives it a little bit more like sarcasm and annoyance to it. which I laughed about when I was listening to it, because I imagine, like, if the exact same song that he was singing was sung by somebody else from a different part of the country or a different part of the world, like, it may not have as much sarcastic edge as it does to it, but there's something about that going through the nose that gives it that edge. And vocally, it's like he's not doing, massive scales or anything, obviously, but he's a damn good singer. Like, just clean, clear, pure pop singer with that little bit of slight edge to it. Like, he can carry a tune. So it's just one of the more simpler things that we can appreciate about this band again, is that simply you have somebody who's clean and has their own style tonally, decent vocalist who can clearly carry a tune. And then you have somebody who is also carrying a tune, singing harmonies in perfect unison at the perfect spots, making it sound more of that pop song. Whatever that the interval is within that chord, it's like a fourth or a fifth or something there to round that up. And then you have the rhythm guitar, very simple, very clean, distorted, but well played. And the rhythms are played cleanly and well. And then you have the bass lines that are complex enough to not just be following straight along with the power chords. Like, you've got like a decent bass line that's played in a very melodic way throughout. And then you've got a drummer who's well trained, who can keep a beat, who can do some amazing fills and do some amazing build-ups and play right along with it in an extremely talented manner. And it's just cleanly and plainly exactly what it is. No frills, nothing added, nothing over the top. And so that's what makes them a great band. Like, that's it. Their talent is very simple, but it is talent. And it's not talent in a way that you would say, oh, they've got raw talent, meaning that it's obvious that you're good at something, but you need like time to develop it and polish it. It already does come across, at least on this album, as pretty polished for the talent that it exactly is. So, stream of consciousness notes that I wrote about Kerplunk were, what's funny is I actually always liked this album better than Dookie in a way. I don't know if that was like a subconscious thing for me at the time, being young, to like something that was like not the most popular mainstream thing on MTV. But when I went back and listened to it again, and forgive me, when I read the little blurb about it, wherever I was reading for the minute that I read, it's kind of hard to believe that it was recorded at a recording studio. Like, it's just very punk rock. Like, it's stripped down. This is not, like a commercially successful, cleaned up, very professional recording. Like, somebody could have just done this in their room on some of the songs. One question that I did have, which I didn't look up because, as you guys know, or will know if you watch enough of these videos, I try to do as little research on this as possible because I want my reactions. I hate that, like, reaction video. But I want my thoughts as an engineer to be as genuine as they possibly could be without, like, letting somebody's review or article come in, or like the Wikipedia, whatever. I just look up like a couple of dates and I go. But one question I had that I didn't actually get answered is that there's really great guitar solos going on the cover of The Who's My Generation, which is the last song. And I was like, did Billy Joe play these solos? Because if he did, that would answer the question right there of whether they purposefully didn't, add extra things to it, even though they could have, or if they didn't because they kind of weren't able to. And then so I, thought, like, it's obviously an overdub. I mean, it sounds vastly different than the rest of the song. Like, you can clearly hear that. It's significantly louder and a very different tone than the rest of the guitars. But I never got that question answered. Okay, I just didn't look. Forgive my laziness. And so I'm still wondering, like, Billy Joe, can you do solos? And I have just never seen. Perhaps you can. Another thing that I thought listening to this is in terms of songwriting, much like the Ramones, a lot of these songs became punk rock, but they were really more like 50s pop songs that were played in a more aggressive manner with more distorted guitars and at a faster tempo. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, but a lot of it was like standard 50s chord progressions that you could have found in any straight up rock and roll song or almost rockabilly song. And I think the fact that Kerplunk wasn't a super cleaned up professional mix just makes it even more punk rock. And I loved that at the time. Like, I liked it not being as clean and professionally done. And I still kind of love that because it speaks a lot to the DIY thing. They got it done when it needed to be done. I will say, since it is done like that, you have to have done it like that because that's what you had to do. Like, it can't be an engineer that actually knows what they're doing and has like an extremely big or expensive studio and all these tools and all this knowledge and like tube gear in a big city. And then you've just purposefully done like a bad job. If it's comes out sounding DIY, it actually has to be DIY, or else it's going to mess up your reputation a little bit. So, to the point, I don't think it's purposefully terrible for the point of making it contrived or sound like more punk or worsely done. I don't get that impression. Like, you've got mixes that are on this album that are kind of all over the map, like towards the end of the song, they get even really more DIY, and towards the beginning, they sound better. And I think that that's natural to have mixes that are all over the board, mainly because it's happened to me. It's just that sometimes, especially if you are getting studio space, that stuff can cost by the hour if you're doing it yourself, and you may not have that kind of money. Or you just may not have that kind of time. And then when you go devote your time and attention to certain mixes, you naturally just gravitate towards the songs that you pick that you want to be on the beginning of the album. Maybe it's like the ones that are your favorites. And then you spend as much time as possible that you can on whatever you pick first. And then at the end, maybe you run out of time. And like, that's happened to me multiple times. Like, I have some mixes on my albums that I'm like admittedly kind of ashamed of. And it was just literally because I got one pass at them. One. I mean, and that's just, you can rough it up, but like, that's what you're going to get, That's just no kind of way to do a mix. It's just not enough adjusting. And so, you're going to come out with something that sounds like you passed over it once in that case. So if that was the case for Kerplunk, I mean, that's totally understandable because that's just how it goes. But who knows? And also at this time, this is a little independent record label with punk bands on it. I mean, I don't know what happened, the space they rented, if they had somebody who had like as much of ability as when you get somebody who's more professional, that you have a lot more money and time to throw at a band. And plus, if you're a small band, I mean, you really may not even have that expectation if you're starting out. Like, who the hell knows if you think anything of that magnitude was going to happen to Green Day like it did to them? Because, like, punk rock, was it ever meant to be as mainstream as it became in the early 90s or like, was here and there around the 80s? When had it ever really been as forced as much into commercial success? Like, you have the punk rock of the 80s, and some of it was recorded really well and it sounds really great. But to get it on this big stage that it became in the early 90s, to have MTV that's like pushing it to your children, every 15 or 20 minutes. And then you've got these giant punk concerts where there's like a bunch of bands on stage and they're all touring together all at once. And now it's like this nationwide thing. I mean, whenever you go to record an album like that at the beginning, like these beginning albums, like baby bands, do you ever have the thought or expectation that your band is going to blow up in the way that Green Day did? Or eventually would, like have this genre be as accepted as much as it was? So my point here is that maybe you don't go into these initial recordings with that same intention, money or time or expectation aside. Like you just go into the studio just to get something recorded, like get it onto tape. I mean, any band would do that today, not knowing what will happen to them. Just get something onto tape, get it down, and you'll be happy that you could have what you have recorded. Labels also, I mean, especially the smaller independent ones. Like when somebody says that they are on a label, like what does that actually mean? I mean, it doesn't mean the label necessarily has like hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to throw at whatever the endeavor is. Sometimes a label can just be a person who went down and had a couple $100 to form an LLC and wanted all of like his band and his friends' bands and to be like in a collection of works in a group together. It doesn't mean that anybody actually had like funding for these things. So you can't necessarily assume that if somebody's on a label either. Oh man, this meandering. Oh God. I labeled this one, "Can studio tricks really make something bad sound good?" And then I fought with myself for a while about this. So, like, it's no disrespect to any band's earliest recordings of things. Like, if you took my music and I didn't have to do every single damn thing myself, and you had a team of people and professionals that had been doing this for years with more depth and access to more really expensive equipment and people advising them and different sets of ears coming in to give their perspective and thoughts on it. And the goal was for it to be the most cleaned up professional Los Angeles product that you ever wanted my stuff to be, or any of you guys' stuff. That is going to sound very, very different than what I can do by myself, even though I did have access to nice gear and I had to do a lot more things myself than I could have with a team of people. I mean, anybody's going to sound different with other input. The more input, the different changes that you're going to have. And for the better, and for the worst at the time, you never know. So it just goes to show, and it makes me think a lot of like punk rock in general, just like crappy recordings. We appreciate them for that. Like it gives them even more of an authentic feel. Like what if you took like, say you're just like a local band and maybe somebody was thinking this. This is what I was thinking out loud at the time when I was writing this. If you like went down and took your local punk band from like your local punk club, like wherever you are now, with like all the smelly kids and nobody has any money and like the skate punks and like everybody's got shaved heads and they're like wasted and poor, and you took them and recorded them like in the most professional studios, how exactly would that sound? Like, and I thought it was kind of like an interesting social experiment whenever you think about it, because then you get to the answer to the question, like, is that thing really shitty or just because it wasn't given the proper tools? Like Green Day, for example. Do you have a commercially viable product? And then I was thinking, as an engineer, because I was going through this thought experiment, there's an expression, you can't polish a turd. There's only so much you can do. And for some things, a person has to be talented in the first place, just hands down. Like that much is true. I've done sound for people who maybe just don't have the realization at all that they just aren't that good. I'm sorry, babies. That's just not sing. And that's all a subjective opinion or whatever on like what an audience would like. But as an engineer, like, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. You do the best that you can do with what you have. So there's a lot of little tricks that you could do. Like vocals, for example, you can drown them in reverb. You can bury them in a mix a little more to where, like, volume-wise, they're not as loud, sort of hide things and disguise them. So at the time I was thinking, I will say to the answer to the question, no, I don't think that solely as the social experiment goes, that you can just go down and add all your shiny bells and whistles and expensive recording tricks and magically turn a band that's terrible into a product that's good. And then I realized that this is 2026 and yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can. This is not 1993 where my mind has been in listening to all this stuff. We can make crap sound good or acceptable or whatever is, like, subjectively enjoyed at the moment. So yeah, I mean, we know that's probably happened a lot more times than we would care to admit, especially in the modern days of computers. But I think as an engineer, at least we have an awareness, and the general public probably does at this point too, that it's just tricks. Like, maybe the audience has an awareness and they just don't care. I mean, that's possible. But I think in terms of Green Day, though, where I was going with all of this rambling, is that they clearly had talent in their own way, and they just needed a little more polish like they got with Dookie, meaning that it's not like they couldn't play their instruments at all and they just walked off up the street and, like, stepped up to a microphone. There's, like, a lot of time and effort that you have to put in to learning an instrument and vocal training that you have to do and practicing and singing and harmonizing. And maybe this is just me, but I wonder if people spend as much time these days doing that anymore that they did at the time. And it's because, there's a lot of things these days that you could be doing instead of that. And when I was young, like, there literally weren't as many things that I could be doing instead of practicing singing or learning how to play guitar. Like, I didn't have a phone that I was scrolling through. It just didn't exist. All right. And then I got to their earliest one, 1,039 slappy hours, or whatever we're calling it. So, as a grown-up adult engineer, my tendency to critique anything, I've thought about this, mostly revolves around being critical, and that's not necessarily like the best thing. And in this case, that's not really what I would like to do, is to nitpick, like, the little things that could have been done or whatever. Because, I mean, what does it serve me to tell you why this is, like, not the best recording? I mean, it obviously not. It's like some of their first stuff. And so I think what's important here is that we have to think about people's, especially earlier works, in terms of context. Like, yes, the drums sound like they were recorded inside of a tin can, and you don't have the full stereo image, the fullness of sound or anything, like in complete balance with one another. The recording is very thin and trebly, but like, that is not what was happening here in these times. This is exactly what things used to be like for me and my friends when we were first starting out and we were young. Like, you're just not going to have a crazy good recording when you're like a teenage punk rocker in somebody's garage. You're going to do the best you can with what you have. And I think that's an important lesson to take away for anybody who's watching this, is like, it doesn't matter. Like, this is my opinion. Nothing has to be perfect. Just get it recorded. Like, you don't wait or, pause and doubt yourself if you think that you are, like, not technically the best at something, and so then you don't do it. Every time you do something, just try to do one little thing better. You add that up, you're going to be great. Eventually, change one little thing. Try to do it better. So back then, for this album, these beginning albums, they likely were recorded something like ADAT or like reel-to-reel tape or some kind of cassette tape or God knows what. Somebody just threw it out there because they could. Like they didn't have all the technology that we have now. They didn't have all the information about recording that we have now. Or maybe they did have the information out there, but you had to get that information from like magazines, like Tape Op. I can't remember what the other one was, but like just to be able to learn all these little tricks of the trade, information still is slow and going from person to person on paper. And so for the most part, like you do the best that you can with what you have and just go ahead and be proud of it. And I think for something like this is, not an album that somebody would want to go back and try to redo or remaster. I'm a believer in that. I think that you should just leave things alone at some point because you could really totally like continuously update anything. Like you could make it sound full and beautiful and perfect, but you would kind of be destroying whatever you were able to capture in that age, in that moment. And sometimes like that's what's really great about those types of things. Like you don't want to mess with these, because that's what it's like for any baby band starting out. And really, subjectively, when I listen to this album, I like it better like that. That's what it sounded like. That's what punk rock sounded like. Like that's what all of our bands sounded like. Like this is what you expected this to sound like and what you loved about it and you wanted it to sound like this. So in a lot of ways, it's even better because it just makes it more real. And I will say, as a positive for this recording, what I really admire about it is like the harmonies are exactly the same level volume-wise as the main vocal. And that's something that it characterizes pop punk in more of a way, is these great harmonies that they have, they really like shine. They're not buried as a support to the vocal. They are something that defines and characterizes both of the vocals together as a whole. As far as subject matter for this album, it's pretty standard for pop punk, like the girl across the room. Don't walk away. Don't turn your back. She left me. It's like, the girl that got away, who's hurting me and stuff like that. Pretty tame and benign teenage crush sort of things. But yeah, in summary, for 1039 slapped out smoothie hours, these are standard garage band songs. I mean, we have the benefit of looking back on things, but how many thousands and thousands of little suburban garage bands were people in, just like on this album? I was. And nothing that they ever did made it anywhere. Like, they must have all these broken, dusty old cassette tapes in the back of a closet somewhere. I do. I mean, I must have been at least like 7 or 8 of these little garage bands along the way. And this could have been, what happened to Green Day as well. Like, they just happened to make a bigger jump. And that's what you have to do when you're learning how to play. You go mess around, you write songs, you don't have enough really life experience for them to have like any sort of content other than what exactly is around you. And that's not a bad thing either, because then what you're writing about really speaks to your peer group. And you're writing from a place where everyone around you is going to be able to understand. Like, at this point in my life, for example, I don't think that I could write songs that maybe like somebody who's significantly younger is going to be able to understand in the same way I do. They may be able to appreciate it as the art that they're hearing, but like we are just, clearly I'm not going to be in the same headspace as like a 14-year-old. So it's just really nice if you start out that young, that that the things that you're going through in the moment as you're learning to play and you're writing stuff, the people around you are probably going to get it in the same way that you get it. And this is a rite of passage, these little garage bands that everybody goes through when they're starting out. Like you learn how to play triads at the end of the neck, you learn how to play power chords, and you're like, let's start a band. And then you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know how to record everything, and you try and you fail, and somebody leaves, and then you get in fights, and you have all this drama, and you feel really passionate about it. And like these times are really critical as a musician because your passion is what continues and propels you to practice and to make yourself really, really good. And if you stick with it long enough, because that's what it's really about, is just not giving up. Like if you see that passion through, and when you get to the upper echelon level of being really good at your craft, all those little hours that you spent being terrible are what set you apart. Because if you hone and you work really, really hard, you will be really good. If you work at it long enough, you just can't give up. And I will say, a lot of times too, when you look back over your entire career and the albums in your life, some of the best times and the memories that you have are the times when you kind of sucked. That's true for me. Because this is like when you and your friends were all figuring it out together and figuring out life together. And sometimes more, it was, just more innocently meaningful than when you're actually professionally good. Like you tend to have a lot more fun and a feeling of freedom and not so much pressure. Like not the full brunt of pressure in a way that you have something to live up to or to support. Like you pressure yourself, but it's more of a self-imposed and imagined pressure in that way. So yes, in general, the feeling that I got listening to these 3 albums was that in my life, it was a simpler time. I mean, that's always the way that we feel when we look back on things. But I think really I had those normal feelings of being depressed and hating everything and hating myself. But there were things that I cared about back then. And those things that I cared about were very, very simple. There were very few things that were so meaningful to me, and it was my music. I loved punk rock. I loved it as a teenager in all its different subcategories, like the hard, heavy shit, the angry shit, old school stuff. I cared about my music. I cared about going to shows. I cared about singing and playing guitar. I cared about hanging out with my friends and talking and laughing and driving around together and going different places in our little town. I didn't care about as much and have as much diversity in thought as I do now, just because I hadn't experienced enough about the world to understand a lot of like different higher concepts and more complex things. It just was exactly what simply felt good for me in the moment back then. And listening to these albums brought those feelings all back up. Like I hadn't gone out of my hometown. The internet barely existed or didn't exist. So we just didn't have an opportunity to like understand or experience a bigger, wider world or have the constant distractions thrown at us. We were just simply in the moment enjoying the music. And when I listen to these albums by Green Day, it really brings me right back to that moment. But it also makes me feel sad. And I've thought about this a lot lately because it's like you just can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And in a lot of ways, I really, really wish that I could. Like, I was so frustrated back then by not having gone out and experienced the world and everything that I've done in time since then. But now looking back, I have a real appreciation of having no understanding of anything yet sometimes. I really wish that I could return back to the time where I didn't know what I know now. Like, it's too complicated. I feel like I've seen too much. And listening to Green Day makes me feel like I wish I could go back to that sometimes. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I really appreciate you being here. You know what? We can still enjoy those nostalgic moments in different ways these days. Or if you've never heard these albums, pull them up and listen to them. Make your own memories with this. Thank you so much. Stay awesome.